Let's talk dating and relationships. These are my two favorite topics. I'm gonna dive right in, kind of go point by point. It's actually from a book that I wrote and published. Instead of having you get online and try to read it, I'm gonna just give you all the best stuff here summarized. And when I wrote the book, I specifically targeted men. I'm actually gonna work towards including men, women, whatever your gender identity in this delivery so that you can be ready to get out there and date. The first thing I'm going to dive into as I crack it open, I'm going to kind of use this as like a cheat sheet for me to go through, will be to talk a little bit about online dating. Do it. It's how I met my wife, and it's going to expand your pool. So I'm a big fan of getting on apps, getting on anything that's going to increase the possibility of you dating, getting to know other people, women, men. To set up an online profile, I'm going to give you just a couple basic outline points. Include photos, ideally include photos that include you with other people, possibly your family. You know, if you want to get clearance from your family before you do those photos, awesome. Keep it short and sweet, but definitely demonstrate that you filled it out and that you're committed to dating. If it's a very sparse kind of skeleton profile, it's going to send the message you're not really interested, and you might have candidates kind of pass you up. At the same time, I wouldn't go overboard and try to put an entire novel inside it. I would just be really clear about who you are, some of your interests, what you're looking for ultimately with dating. And specifically with this video and with my book, I'm targeting folks who are looking for a long-term relationship, possibly marriage down the road if that's something you're gunning for. So this is what this is targeting for. Hopefully that's you. The next one I want to dive into with is getting clear about what you're looking for in a relationship. And that's a lot of what I was sharing just now. So I'd take a pause. I mean, you can do it right now. You may have already done it. What do I want? Like, do I want to do the whole long-term relationship thing? Is that me? Do I possibly want kids? You know, I mean, dating is an absolute pain in the ass. You know, as someone who tried and failed at it for 12, 13 years. So I would say make time to get your clarity about, you know, what do I want? Do I really want to be in a long-term relationship? Is it worth watching the rest of this video and taking all of Jeremy's ideas and trying to integrate them? I think is a good thing to consider. Let's talk non-negotiables. Okay, non-negotiables are the things that you will, just like it sounds, not negotiate on. So think through things like there could be a specific age range for you. There could be a profession, education level. There could be some personal habits, smoking, drinking. Could be some character stuff, honesty. For me is a huge one. I would actually consider that the absolute foundation of a relationship. So if honesty, trust does not exist, in my experience, the relationship also cannot exist. Once you have those non-negotiables, that's going to help you set your bar for where you're looking both in real life, dating in real life, as well as getting online or on the apps. The next thing I want to jump into is attachment style. So if you've seen my videos, I've got some short blurbs on it. Let me go into it here. So attachment styles, there's three. Secure style. Secure style is someone who believes I am lovable, I am worth loving, and I want to love someone else, bring somebody into my life, invest in that person. I am accessible to the person I date or I'm in a relationship with. I'm responsive to them and, you know, get back to their texts and calls, and I am engaged. So I know what's going on in their life. You know, I keep track of what kind of where they're at in the world. So that's a secure style. Give or take, about half of us fall somewhere in this sort of middle, more secure style. There's also what's called the avoidance style. The avoidance style is someone who needs a little bit more space, gets overwhelmed with a lot of closeness or intimacy. These folks have a tendency when they get overwhelmed in relationship or by intimacy to withdraw, pull away, put up some kind of walls like you see me doing with my hands right now. They're not always great at getting back to folks as punctually as they would like them to. Let me swing now to the other style, which is called anxiously attached. Anxiously attached folks tend to want a lot of reassurance, closeness, intimacy. What's our status? can we hang out? Can we hang out now? Where are you? Why aren't you getting back to me? They kind of have this, you're seeing it in my body language, kind of this pursuing, kind of leaning in style. In my experience, even though the research would say we're about 50% in the middle, secure style, 25% more avoidant, 25% more anxious, I would say we're all a mix of the three. The work, if you choose it, is really to work towards that secure style, right? Getting back to folks, leaning into intimacy, setting good boundaries, loving fully, being open and available to receive that love. Let's go. Expand my pool. So I made the mistake of not expanding my pool initially when I was dating. I was not into the apps or getting online, and I did not meet a person who could become my wife. That wasn't happening for me. So I decided I need to expand my pool. And so I did that by getting online. I'll date myself here because I got on OkCupid, and it took a while. It took a lot of dates. It actually took, I think I went on 50 dates the year that I met my now wife, but it did take me expanding my pool and getting into online dating before I actually met somebody. So I'm a proponent. I say expand your pool. The thought I wanted to share a little bit was, it comes from some John Gottman research on how to avoid divorce. And his suggestion is to argue more. So I know that sounds paradoxical. What he means by that is couples who find a way to talk through stuff, argue about stuff, communicate about stuff, not brush stuff under the rug, those are the couples that tend to last longer. His research, which actually is a love lab down in LA, he is about 95% accurate on predicting whether or not couples will still be together in 6 years. He's an excellent source, one of the top couples therapists in our field. He says, argue more. Let's go on to the next tip, which is maximizing your opportunity online. So kind of like I was saying earlier, I find getting online, getting on the apps is a great way to expand your pool. A way to maximize your opportunity online is to also expand your geography. So maybe you've kind of historically said, I'm only willing to drive or commute 10 minutes, 15 minutes. Consider expanding that, maybe 20, maybe it's 30. I would be realistic, right? So I don't tend to find, if the person lives an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours away from you, if it's not realistic to be doing that drive or commute on a regular basis, maybe that's a little outside of your geography. So I'd say the same thing when it comes to age, let's say. If you've kind of said, hey, I'm 30, so I'm looking for somebody who's 24 or older, maybe go to 23 or older, or you can do the same the other direction as a way to expand your pool, maximize your opportunity. And the same thing applies, a mistake we make, and I definitely made this mistake when I was online, was to be overly picky, critical about people, profiles, some of the details. And I would find the best way to really maximize your opportunity is to be careful not to get kind of caught into what's often called hyperselectivity, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's being really stringent about like this age and this look and this, until you've whittled down to this tiny pool of people that, as you may have guessed, are getting hundreds of thousands of messages already and just may not get back to you. The next one I want to talk about a little bit is creating initial messages with somebody you're interested in. I tend to find just hitting the like button or a thumbs up or liking the photo is fine, but it doesn't really put you on the other person's radar. I love, like my wife, she was actually the one who reached out to me first. I love that because I think it challenges some of the gender norms about, guys are always supposed to reach out first. So I would encourage you, if you're a woman dating or looking to get into it, reach out to guys, send them a message, a couple thoughts, keep it shorter, sweeter, rather than, anything more than a paragraph or two. Also avoid something super short like sup or how's it going, or something like that just shows you're not really putting a lot of effort into it. If you can, personalize it. So, quick little scroll through their profile. I wouldn't spend more than 30 seconds to 2 minutes looking at a profile. Check and see that you're reasonably attracted to the person, and then just look at some of the details. If you are looking for a long-term relationship, double check that there as well. and then see if you can engage them on something. So, it could be a little generic, it could be travel, or it could be food, but if you kind of catch something when you're reading their profile, say something about it. Like, oh, I, saw that you went and saw Everest 3 years ago. It sounds like an absolute bucket list trip. What was one of your favorite things about Nepal? Something like that. It could be something local, a coffee shop. I saw that you love coffee and you like finding, local roasters. My favorite in the area is 4 Barrel Coffee here in San Francisco. What's yours? Right? Great ways to start a message. The things I would avoid, like how to not create initial messages, other than sort of the really short, really long point I've already shared, would be stuff that's overly flirty, overly sexual. I would avoid trying to get too personal, trying to rush into a first date. I would really just keep it as like, almost think of it as I'm at a cocktail party and what is kind of the initial small talkish, bantery type conversation I would try to make with somebody. Ideally, try not to ask them about work if you can avoid it because it's such a drab topic for a lot of us. But other than that, I'd say, a lot of the more somewhat superficial topics are a great place to start. Let me go through kind of how I think about doing a messaging sequence, when you are in an app and you're kind of messaging with somebody. This will sound a little formal because I realize we're shifting to a lot just kind of rapid text message, but I'm going to lay it out that way and then you can kind of extrapolate for, whichever app you're on or however you're currently doing dating. When you're initially reaching out, short and sweet, preferably some kind of a question, have that be your initial reach. Ideally, that person responds to within a day or two, right? And if you're on the other end of this, if you receive the message, I tend to find a sweet spot for getting back to that person is within an hour or two to maybe a day or two, right? I tend to find if you rush and respond within a few minutes, especially if you consistently do that, it demonstrates that you maybe are desperate or don't have a lot going on in your life, which, hey, if you're feeling desperate, I get it, I've been there, I know, and I also don't want you to transmit that message to the other person. So instead I would transmit the message of secure, I'm solid, my life is full, but on the other end of that spectrum, I wouldn't wait more than a day or two, right? Because I think that's gonna communicate, I'm not very serious, I'm dating somebody else or a bunch of other people, I'm too busy, right? So communicate through your messaging pace. I am serious about this, I'm here, I'm interested, I want to date, but I don't necessarily live on, whichever this app of choice is. Let me go into maybe a little more of the sequence here, which would be get back to the person, ask them some kind of question, maybe you get a little bit under superficial, right? So now possibly it's, hey, I love that one photo of you with your family on the beach, where were you? How was that trip? Something like that. That can be a nice way to kind of start to get a little bit more personal and get to know the person a little bit better. Let me dive in with you to the ask. So if you've had, again, in this, since we're getting so texty, I'm gonna say like 6-ish interactions with a person. So maybe it's been a few rounds of texting and you've done it, 6-ish times. And of course, that's a very loose number. It could be 3 or 4, it could be 10 or 12 that have spanned the course of anywhere from a couple of days to, let's say, like a week. I think that's a great place, especially as the guy, and I'll give you some options as the woman, to move this into the, let's go on a date, right? So you've had some messages, you've sort of gotten to know the person, there's some familiarity, some banter, a little bit of humor back and forth. I would now think this is a great opportunity to shift into some version of, I'd love to take you out on a date. How does Friday, 7:30 p.m. at such and such a place sound to you? Another good option. I love like weekend afternoons. So like sort of the Saturday, Sunday, early afternoon time frame, 2 p.m. Let's grab coffee or tea or, caramels to reference Good Will Hunting. It doesn't really matter. And take a walk around the park, right? Dolores Park here in San Francisco is one of my favorites. Great place to do a first date, and that's the initial sequence that I would, offer you. To avoid being too flirty, too aggressive is a great way to start your message, right? So especially for you guys out there, don't, talk about sex and, reference their bodies and we should do something late at 9 p.m. and let's get drunk and go to your house. And, you know, I mean, I think a lot of you know this. I just would not go that direction in early messages. You know, save that when you get to know each other, right? Like then we can be flirty, sexual, you know, go down that road. If you're finding that the person on the other side, you know, man or woman, but especially if the guys are being too flirty, sexual, etc., it may just be telling you they're here for a booty call, a hookup, and I think it's great to listen to that, you know, delete them and go on to the next guy. I also wanted to talk a little bit about, you know, for you women, if the guy is kind of getting you caught in the endless texting, blah, like, you know, I jokingly had one of my clients call it a textationship, which I think is perfect. If that's happening for you, this is how I would end it. So let's say you've been going back and forth for more than 4 or 5 days. It doesn't really seem to be getting anywhere. It's just a lot of like, so how are you? And what are you up to? And let's talk about this, let's talk about that. You're not on here for a pen pal. I mean, if you are on here for a pen pal, keep doing that. But if you are not, a great place to put that boundary into place for this guy would be to say something like, hey, you know, I'm really here to meet guys and go on dates. So if that's where you're at, the ball is in your court, right? So you've put a clear kind of demarcation in the sand. You know, this is where I stand, I'd like to go out, but you haven't gone as far as asking him on a date, right? I think it's nice if the guy can ask you to go on a date because that sets up, you know, more of a chase, more pursuit. Let's go into calling or texting. I think this is evolving. So, you know, in my era, or even folks a little bit older than me, I think calling was kind of the standard. I actually did call my, you know, now wife back in 2012. And, you know, we had kind of a funny conversation on the phone that we still reference sometimes. And that's how I asked her out, right? So I called her, we chatted for 5 or 10 minutes. And I said, hey, I'd love to take you out this weekend. You know, we set up kind of the coffee and walk around Lake Merritt, which is in Oakland, California, which was great, right? So that was how we did it. I recognize it's shifting so much more to texting, and so I would say texting is fine. You can also kind of put the option out there. You can say something in, you know, one of your last messages, maybe before you get the other person's number. You can say something like, hey, you know, I'd love to chat for a few minutes on the phone and talk about a date. You know, what's your number? If you're not much for calling, I totally get it. You know, we can sort this out on text as well. And so that way you kind of shift from the apps over to texting or calling. Feels a little bit more intimate, and it also puts the ball in her court about whether or not she wants a call. Let's talk asking for a date via text, which, you know, I've more or less covered. I think the languaging in it is really what I went into here in the book, which would be some version of, you know, really enjoying getting to know you online or on this app, love to take you out. How does Saturday 2 p.m. sound? If she does not want to do Saturday 2 p.m., she's busy, whatever, have kind of a plan B in mind. You know, have sort of a, you know, oh, okay, cool, well, you know, I'm actually busy on Sunday, so we can't do Sunday, but would Tuesday, you know, maybe a quick drink before dinner, or, you know, with something during the day. I know in this sort of work from home era, some of us can do something during the day. Would that work for you? Try to be clear about this is the time that I'd love to take you out, but also try to be flexible, right? So if you find that you're getting kind of rigid, like I have to take her out on Saturday at 2 p.m., it may not work for her schedule. It may not be any commentary on you. If you do find the other person is just not available, too busy, you know, you've sort of laid out 2 or 3 or 4 different options for them, I would say they may not be interested. Maybe their plate is full. Maybe they're a little bit avoidantly attached. I have no idea, but it doesn't really matter because they're not showing up for you and what you need. So what I would do in that case is I would say, you know, looks like we're having a little bit of trouble lining up a date. Balls in your court would be one way to do it. You can also just stop asking, let the other person pursue you, and see if that gets any traction. So, you know, can I meet somebody in real life is something I get asked a lot in my private practice here, and the answer is absolutely. You know, you can meet someone anywhere. I really find it's about putting yourself into a singles, age appropriate, rich area. And so whatever that is for you, if you're 21, that could be a college campus. If you are 29, that could be a bar that attracts people about your age. If you're 35, that could be a running group because you like to run. If you're 43, it could be corgis on the beach every Saturday at 2 p.m., right? Like these are the kind of things that you need to or would benefit you to find, right? And you can check Meetup is a site that I've used. I know Match.com has done a lot of these kind of mixers or things to get people together. I would really search your age group and look at like what kind of spaces are doing events oriented towards you, and especially your interests, right? If you're not into running and biking, don't go running and biking. But if you love, going for hikes in Marin, or if you love, going to dog parks, like find events that are oriented that direction, right? It does not have to include alcohol. I find, a lot of times in our culture it can be kind of the automatic, let's get drinks, let's do this, let's grab a drink, let's do brunch. And I find, alcohol is fine to include on dates if, you happen to drink, but it can add like a little sparkle shimmer to the initial meeting, if not the initial 2 or 3 meetings that may not be present if, there's no alcohol involved. So I love mixing up the first 2 or 3 dates. So, maybe the first one is a coffee date, maybe the second one is a drink, or it's an activity that doesn't include alcohol. Maybe the third one is dinner and possibly, you get drinks over dinner. That's a good way for you to set up your first few dates. I found somebody I'm interested, now what? So awesome, congrats. This is the dream. I mean, again, I'm just thinking about meeting, my person who became my wife. I just, it was amazing. Like I remember showing up at this coffee shop and I saw her, and actually she was coming out of the bathroom and I was in the line because I hadn't seen her when I walked in. I was like, oh my God, like that woman is beautiful. I would love to get her number, but this is really awkward because I'm supposed to go on a first date, right? And so I'm standing in line trying to decide what to do. And I fortunately knew better not to try to get the number of somebody different, right, when I'm about to go on a date. But luckily she walks over and it was her. It was, the woman who is now my wife. And so, I find that this is really this is the gem, right? When we do find that chemistry with somebody. If that is you, if that just happened on a first date or first couple of dates, my suggestion, especially if you are the guy, would be to, keep a little bit of chase going, right? Like this is a lot of what creates in heterosexual relationships the pursuit and the charge and sort of the energy around early dating, which I love, and it's a ton of fun. So, say let's do it again in 4 days or a week. It doesn't have to be tomorrow because it can feel a little bit anxious or desperate or overly eager, but I wouldn't also put it off to a month from now, right? So, have your foot on the gas a little bit. Love to take you out again, set up a plan. Same thing if you're the woman and, you're finding he's not pursuing you at all. I have 2 thoughts. One is he may be avoidantly attached, not interested, in which case I would kind of, let him go if you can. I know it's a very hard thing to do. Alternatively, you might, re-express some interest. You might say something like, hey, tons of fun, last week or last Saturday, really looking forward to doing it again. If you continue to get kind of the silent treatment, if you get ghosted, if he's sort of texting but not really making plans, I think that's a really good indicator. He's probably just not at a place where he wants to date. He didn't find the spark with you, and it's time to look elsewhere. Let's talk planning a date. So I find, especially for the guy, having a plan A and a plan B in your back pocket, especially if you're getting on the phone call, old school style, or even if you're texting, is something. I have women in my practice all the time either saying, oh my God, guys do not plan dates. I'm literally planning, or they're not telling me what we're doing, they're not giving me a time. And so I encourage the men that I work with, plan a date, right? And be flexible with it, like I was sharing earlier. It doesn't have to be a specific time, a specific day. I also wouldn't say something like, I'm free always, anytime, any day of the week. Like, ideally you have a full life. And if you don't, I want to talk more about that in a little bit. But even if you don't have a lot going on in your world right now, don't signal to her like I'm wide open, because that's going to signal to her, well, does he work? Does he have friends? Does he have like a lot of good stuff going on in his life? So give her some specific times, maybe it's Sunday, 9 a.m. if she's one of those early up, let's go to the farmer's market. Maybe it's Wednesday, there's like a middle of the week, you're both off and you want to do like a half day at work and take off at 3 p.m., right? And go walk the river, whatever's cool in your neighborhood. Let's talk about the asking her out and online messaging and chatting. So when you're in this kind of back and forth with the person on the other side, be clear about your intention to take her out. Be strategic about the time and place. Don't, waffle or whatever, or communicate a lack of clarity. Like, I think it's really important to be just, hey, I like you, you're a lot of fun, or I'm enjoying our conversation, let's move this into real life. I would avoid here getting into too much sort of back and forth chatting, just sort of messaging like, hey, what's up, how are you, how's your day, etc. I think those are fine as long as you've established a date, but I wouldn't do that as a way to kind of circumvent, going right in, making a plan, being confident, being courageous. Let's talk a little bit more about the chase. So the chase for me is really about that, masculine and feminine energy. And of course, men and women have a mix of both. So to really get those two things into a bit of a dance or a bit of a circuit with one another, right? So the masculine energy has more of a, make a plan, take you out, pay for dates, be a little bit more directive about, what we're doing and my interest in you, and right? And the feminine energy has a little bit more of a, sounds great and let's do it, and that sounds fun, and I love that place, and wow, I had so much fun with you last night or yesterday, right? So you see kind of the masculine energy has more of a, an energy moving forward, and the feminine energy has more of an energy of receiving. And again, I think it's great for men and women to practice being in a little bit of both, even if overall in a hetero world it's going to be, or hetero relationships, it's going to be a little bit more he pursues her. Google stalking. So, another funny story about me is I was on my third date with the woman who became my wife, and we're driving, fortunately here we've got wine country that's about an hour north, and so we were driving to wine country because I thought, oh my God, that would be such a fun third date. We get maybe 10-15 minutes into the ride, it's early-ish in the day, 9-10, I don't remember, and she says, she's like, she gets kind of giggly and a little quiet. She's like, I've got something to tell you. And I'm like, what, and I'm like, what is it? And it's funny because I had the feeling or the sense that she had Googled me, right? And of course, because I'm a couples therapist and a relationship coach, it's pretty easy to find my website. So, she pulls it all up and she sees, this stuff about, oh, he works with dating and, coaching and yada, yada. And so she said, oh, I Googled you, and it looks like you're like a dating and a relationship coach guy, because at the time my work was a little more exclusively dating, it's now moved more to relationships and couples, but she wondered if she was like an experiment, right? And so it had made her a little bit gun shy going into the date. And so luckily for me, I was able to assure her that I was genuinely interested and liked her for her, and I was not running any type of a candid camera type experiment with her. But I find Googling somebody ahead of time, I know it's so tempting. I know a lot of us do it. I have totally done it. Checking out their socials, whatever it is so tempting. And yet I tend to find it does more harm than good. And what I mean by that is you see the way somebody presents themselves online, and you either are really drawn to it, really attracted to it, and it seems like this great big fantasy, which, by the way, fantasies by definition, I mean, that bubble could pop the moment you walk into that date and he or her doesn't look quite as beautiful or glamorous as exciting as they seemed on their, socials page, their Instagram reels, whatever it was. The opposite is also very, very likely or possible, which is I might see something that seems very like ho-hum about the person, maybe something I'm kind of skeptical about. Can I trust this person? What's going on? And I tend to find there's such a small story available for who we are online, even though, a lot of us put a lot of stuff out there about ourselves, that it's easy to misread something, not really know what the person is about. And I tend to find doing that, especially before the first or second date, can do more harm than good. So my nudge to you is don't Google stalk somebody. Paying for dates. So this one's tricky, right? I mean, I know we're in a world with a lot more gender equality. Obviously, we still got a long ways to go, but I think that paying for dates is a part of this, masculine, feminine energy dance. My suggestion, first date, let's say it's a coffee date, maybe you get a drink, whatever it is, pay for the date, right? If you're the guy, pull out your credit card, pull out the cash, cover it. If she kind of, offers to pay or tries to get her own or tries to split with you, I would say, hey, I've got it. Like, it was super fun taking you out, or, let me get this one. I would say the same thing about the second date, right? You're rolling into the second date, maybe it's a little bit more involved. Maybe it's an activity that you need to pay for. Possibly you're sitting down to food, even though I'm a bigger fan of dinner dates for like third date or later, but possibly you're getting something to eat. It's going to cost a little bit more. Once again, I would say, spending the $30 or the $50 or whatever the cost of the activity or meal is going to be is worth demonstrating to her, like, I got you, I like that we can be together. I'm happy to pay for this. And also be in that abundance mentality that down the road, maybe date 3, date 4, she's going to cover it. And vice versa for you as a woman. I would really encourage you to, if he says, hey, I've got it, first date, second date, maybe even the third date, just relish that, right? Like, thank you. This has been a ton of fun, or, coffee was great. The activity was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it. Be in that moment of sort of receptivity and gratitude. By the time you get to, let's say, date 3, maybe date 4, I think it's a great time for the woman to take a little bit more initiative. So let's say, if you're the female, you've been on a couple of dates, you like each other, great time to say, hey, you've taken me out the first 2 times, the first 3 times, I'd love to take you out, right? And kind of like I shared earlier in the video, I would make a pretty clear plan. Like, I know you said you're free on Saturday, so here's kind of what I had in mind, right? Like, why don't at, noon, let's go get lunch at this place, and then at 2 p.m. there's this really cool place I want to show you. It's one of my favorite things in the city, and that's where we're going. Are you down? Right? And let him, get his buy-in for him to be able to say, oh yeah, I'm free and I'd love to do it. And then when you go, cover it, right? When, if you're sitting down to lunch, or if you're going out to something that costs money, pull out your Crasher card and just say, I got you, right? I wouldn't get into a big power struggle with this. So, either gender, if, you're on a date with a woman and she's insistent on paying for her half or whatever, her coffee, just say, just let her do it. I don't think it's a huge deal. And, I don't think getting into kind of a big, like, who's going to cover the check thing is really worth it. I would instead, for either gender, just be willing to receive, right? If the one person's really insistent, like, I want to get my half, or I want to get, our meal or our activity, thanks so much. I really appreciate it. Let's go to the end of the date and the follow-up. So as a guy, I would recommend that you follow up with her after the first date. Let's say it was an afternoon date. I'd follow up later on that day, maybe the next morning at the latest, and that would be the same if it was an evening date, and say some version of, and don't say anything inauthentic, but if it's true and you had a great time, let her know. Hey, really had a great time. You could reference some, joke that the two of you made or something you guys did or were talking about. I keep it super short. I think a sentence is plenty, right? And same for the woman. If you're, went on a date, you like the guy, you had fun, let him know. Hey, super fun. excited to do it at some point down the road. I wouldn't get into a big text exchange at that point. I wouldn't send paragraphs. I also wouldn't be unauthentic. So if you weren't really feeling the chemistry, weren't really into it, I wouldn't send anything, right? And I also wouldn't try to line up a second date right then, right? So you've just dropped her off at her doorstep or her car or however you guys parted ways, and now 30 minutes later you're like texting or trying to line up a second date. I think that shows a lot of over-eager, desperate's kind of a strong word, but it kind of has that energy. So I would not do that. Let's go into the what if I don't hear back from her? I mean, especially if you liked her, right? I mean, it's a total, knife to the heart, right? It's a total gut punch, and I'm feeling for you. I'm partly for the many times that I've had her not be interested in me. So whatever direction this is going, if you had a guy not be interested in you, it's terrible. And it sucks, and it's painful, and it's, especially if you like them. I mean, obviously if you didn't, it's kind of whatever, but I would say if that happens, a couple of things. One is, male or female, do that reach out if you were interested, that night or the next morning, kind of had a great time, love to do it again. If it's crickets, and the crickets continue through, days, maybe even all the way to the next week, I would send some kind of a follow-up message, some version of something casual. Like I would say something like, hey, just thought of you, how's your week going? Something like that. If you get to like day 5, day 7, day 10, you have heard nothing, you could say something like, really had a great time, hoping to do it again, especially if you're the female. If you're the guy, you could be more directive, like, I was just thinking about what a great date we had last week. Here's what I have planned for us for Saturday. Does that work for you? Right? So just be clear, be strategic, have a plan. If they do not respond, I would leave that be, right? I wouldn't do more than like 2-ish follow-up messages. That's mainly for you, right? Because I think every time we put ourselves out there and send this message, it's vulnerable, and especially if they're not going to get back to us, it's just like, it feels like that knife or fork or whatever that's stuck in your heart is getting twisted a little bit, which is no fun, painful. So let's go to the second date. Second date, I find, is a good time to do something different than what you did the first time. So if you did coffee, if you did a drink the first time, switch it up, right? Like, let's go to, maybe she told you about an activity she enjoys doing. She likes indoor rock climbing. She likes taking out the bicycles. She likes taking her dog for a walk. He likes, whatever it is. And again, for the most part, I'd encourage the guy to initiate and plan the second date. So, if you can get her, the two of you, into your element, I find that's a great way to just see a different side of them, right? So maybe you're one-on-one and you were in a park, maybe this time you do something at a museum, or you do something at a, something that like sparks interest, sparks a different sort of outlook. You drive to a, really pretty spot and take a walk at whatever that pretty location is. I think it's a great way to plan a second date. Let me talk about the 3 things you need for the relationship to succeed. All right, so number 1, chemistry and attraction. So I'm gonna group those. You could call them 2, but they're one thing that must be present for this relationship to succeed. Chemistry, you know what that is. It's that feeling of like connection, just that like, wow, like time flies. It's the thing you have with your best friend. That's chemistry. Attraction, you know what that is. I mean, that happens the moment you see the person. It can grow, but I think really attraction is pretty instantaneous. You definitely need a certain amount of both for the date to turn into something long-term. Number 2, compatibility. Compatibility for me really comes down to 2 things. Do you want kids, and where do you want to live, right? So if you're a strong yes and the other person's a strong no on either one of those topics, especially the kids, you are not a good long-term match for each other, right? I've worked with couples who have, gotten to engagement, marriage, and they're on 2 different places, and this can be an absolute relationship killer. The where do you want to live piece, I think it's one thing if you're like, I kind of want to live in the suburbs near such and such a city. The other person says, I want to live in the city. I think there can be some middle ground worked out. If you say, I want to live in downtown San Francisco, and he says, I want to live in rural Idaho, that's not going to work, right? So I think really, kind of in the early phases of dating, first few weeks, maybe months, but ideally kind of on the early side, you get a sense of, these two questions with compatibility. Number 3 is attachment styles. So I'm gonna go a little bit more into detail here shortly, but you need to find somebody who is secure-ish, right? If you are pretty anxiously attached and you tend to pursue more, and the other person is more avoidantly attached and tends to be a little bit slower, a little overwhelmed by intimacy, you're not a good match for each other, and you're likely to create a lot of future scar tissue. It also is a really tall mountain to climb as a couple to be, have one of you fairly avoidant and one of you fairly anxious, and there are plenty of mountains coming your way, right? It's the truth about relationships that often doesn't get talked about. Price of admission. So Dan Savage, you can actually Google price of admission by Dan Savage. He has a great, 5-minute clip on it. He's basically making the point in that every one of us has a price of admission the other person needs to pay to be with us, and vice versa, right? There's going to be certain warts the other person has, certain things that you don't love about them, certain baggage or whatever it is that they're going to carry in from old relationships or from when they were younger, and this is the price of admission to being with that other person. Your decision is, can I pay that price of admission, right? And if you're making excuses for really basic stuff, it's like, well, he chews funny, or I don't love the way that she dresses, or he makes this amount of money per year and I wish he made a little bit more. If it's really tiny stuff like that that's causing you to throw dates out or not continue on dating, that's a pattern that will likely lead to being long-term single or alone. But if it is stuff where it's like, hey, this is not part of my non-negotiables, like it is something that I'm open to, but I recognize it's going to be challenging to be with this person given that habit they have, preference, tendency, baggage, scar tissue, whatever, it's a great time to assess, like, do I want to pay the price of admission to be with this person? So what if your attachment style leans avoidant? So, 80% of the dating pool is more avoidantly attached. 25% of people in the population are more avoidantly attached. So if that is you, it is important for you to find somebody who's either a little bit avoidant like you are, possibly close to center, which would be ideal, kind of secure-ish, and to not be with somebody who's very anxious, right? So you can do a quiz or a test online to figure out if you're, what's your attachment style. If you haven't done that already, I'd highly encourage it. If you lean a little bit avoidant, it just means, you're a little bit slow to get into a relationship. You're not necessarily as quick at getting back to people. That is a indicator for you. You need somebody who can kind of match that style, right? Maybe they kind of like to take things a little bit slow. They don't get super, needy on you or pursuing you a bunch or needing a lot of like closeness and intimacy and responsiveness, because that's going to feel overwhelming. The opposite is also true. What if you lean more anxiously attached? If you're more anxiously attached, you need somebody who's going to be able to be there, respond to you, move towards a more intimate, more reassuring relationship, on a more quick pace. And by quick, I mean, months, right? Not years. If you're still 8 years in and you're not really sure if he's into you, that's problematic, right? Especially if you're more anxiously attached. And, the opposite is true too. Like, if you want something to get from 0 to engagement within the first few weeks, it's not going to happen, right? So I think that's really the work towards how do I become more secure. Let's talk about the eggs in your basket. So if you are dating, and I hope you are, and if you're not, I encourage you to be, right? If you want to be in that long-term relationship, you need to have more than one egg in your basket. And so what I mean by that is have different options available to you. Go to those, single, age-appropriate, rich environments to keep options open, to be meeting people, be on the apps, find a way, if you want to hire a dating coach or hire a matchmaking type service to help you start lining up, different ways to get people in your funnel. That way you can have a few different eggs in your basket, so that if you do lose one, right? Like let's say, you've got a number from this person and you've been dating this person for a couple of weeks, and there's this other person who your friend said they'd set you up on a date with. That way, if one of those options drops off, you still have the other two options, right? If you very early on, and I mean probably within the first 30 days, start really seriously focusing on just one person, and by the way, it's very hard not to get very focused on that person, but if you get so focused on him or her that all other options completely disappear, if that person drops off of your, I guess, out of your basket would be one way to think about it. It can feel really devastating. So keep a few different eggs in your basket. And I think this ties into my next point about creating a full life. To me, creating a full life is exactly what it sounds like. Involve yourself in local activities, plug into your work, have a good social network, reach out to people, call people, text people, do things that make you smile, right? Like, whatever that thing is, get full nights of sleep. If you can, do some physical activity each day. This could be walks, this could be the gym, this could be anything that gets your body moving, gets the sweat going a little bit. This will create a full life, and that does at least two things for you. One is when that other person comes into your life, they're gonna see that you have a full life. They wanna be with somebody who's got a full life, right? The other thing that's gonna do for you is when rejection happens, a guy disappears, a woman stops responding to you, which they absolutely will, you've got a full life to fall back on. You've got that social support, you've got stuff you're plugged into. Let's talk about what you can learn about the other person based on what they do after your first date. All right. If you are hearing crickets for at least days, 2 days, 3 days, 7 days, you are learning the person is either not interested, not at a place where they want to date, or avoidantly attached. Any of the three means they are not qualified to be with you, right? If on the other hand, they're texting you, calling you, texting, getting on your socials, blowing you up, etc., you are learning that the person is probably anxiously attached, and you've got to decide, if I'm very avoidant, this other anxiously attached person may not be a good fit for me. If you're getting a lot of the maybe, the what ifs, the I'm busy's, just kind of the excuses beating around the bush, I would say this is kind of back to that first category. They might be avoidant or not very interested. I wouldn't put a ton of energy into it, right? A couple of efforts, a couple of reaches, and then at some point, let them go. Let's talk about the 3 stages. So I had to pause because I'm like, wait, what's the 3 stages? So 3 stages to me is really length of time kind of early on in dating. The way that I break it up, the 30-90 day rule. So I would suggest to you, get into a relationship, settle on a relationship 30 to 90 days after you've met the person. Here's my logic. If you are, you've met somebody, you matched on the apps, whatever it was, you met in real life, you start dating. If you're trying to get really serious before the 30-day mark, you may not have a lot of information about the person. You may not know them very well. You might not know what their attachment style is. You might not know if you're compatible. It can be a little quick. I'm not saying it's impossible, but I would just say, give it a little time. Go on 3 dates, go on 4 dates, go on 6 dates. The other side of that, which is the 90-day part of it, is if you are dating somebody, you've gone on several dates, maybe it's 10, maybe it's 15, it's getting to the 90-day mark or beyond. If you let that time go past without saying to the person, I like you, I'm into you, I'd like to be exclusive with you, I'd like to date you. Ideally, this comes from the guy, but I think it can come from either party. If you let more than that amount of time go past, it signals to the other person, are they really that interested in me? Are there other people, maybe kind of back burner type folks, or is he or she dating someone else? So I really encourage you, 30 to 90 day rule. That's stage 1. Stage 2, I'd put between the 3-month and the 12-month mark. So this to me is about deciding, do I want to be with this person long-term? Not a hard rule, right? It might take you more than 12 months to really decide if I want this person to be long-term, But during that phase, once you've gotten into the, we are exclusive, we're just dating each other, let that be the time to decide, do I want to be with him? Do I want to pay her price of admission, right? Like, is this really something that I want to do, that I want to be with long term? Because if it is not, then, neither one of us want to waste each other's time, right? And if it is, I think it's a good time to start to look at, like, what's our next chapter, which really, to me, that is stage 3. And stage 3 is sort of the, I'm going to say plus 12 months, even though I think it could happen before then. It's really where you're deciding, you are my person. I want to be with you. I'm going to ask you to marry me. Let's talk about marriage or get married, right? Like, that's really the sort of 12 months plus. You've given it enough time to know what they're about, meet their family, meet their friends, decide what attachment style they have, but you're not letting the sort of year 4, year 6, year 8, year 10 go by without really making a decision and not being in a place where you're wasting each other's time. Last thing, secret sauce. So secret sauce is stick-with-itness. So the only way that you're going to stay in this crazy world called dating and sticking with it till, you have somebody really solid, ideally secure-ish, right? Securishly attached, is if you stick with it. I mean, you've got to get a good social network to support you, get a dating buddy, hire a therapist or a coach to help you work out the stuff that comes up for you while you're dating. Read a book that really gives you kind of direction about dating, relationships. There's, resources for you to lean into to really, like, help yourself be strong when you're out there dating, because there's a lot of rejection. It sucks sometimes. You're going to feel the lowest you maybe have ever felt, especially after rejection of somebody you really cared about. And so that's why I encourage you, plug in socially, work out, go on walks, have a network, have resources to plug into. It's been really great sharing with you, my favorite stuff when it comes to dating, getting out there. As always, love to hear from you in the comments. You can reach out to me directly by email or my website. Take care.